Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us both in person and online for Optometry Australia's inaugural Medicare webinar. And our topic for discussion this evening is Medicare, a practical guide to better use and billing. So my name is Simon Hanna. I'm Optometry Australia's National Policy Advisor, and I'll be facilitating this evening as well as joining both Steve and Luke as a member of the three panel to engage in our discussion on Medicare and billing this evening. I'd like to start by thanking Optometry Victoria and Pete and Michelle for hosting the event, and also for Redback and their assistance in putting the event together this evening. I'd like to start by also welcoming our panellists and just a sort of a brief introduction for our panellists. Steve Xantos on the right there is the Counsellor of the New South Wales ACT Division of Optometry Australia, as well as being the New South Wales ACT appointee to the National Board of Optometry Australia. Steve is a past President of the New South Wales OAA, a past president of the Contact Lens Society of Australia, and has been involved in many other professional organisations, both here and abroad in the States. Steve's career has included roles as an optometric advisor in the Health Insurance Commission and Medicare Australia from 1995 to 2012. So I'd like to thank Steve for joining us this evening from New South Wales. Thank you, Steve. And Luke Arundel, to Steve's right there, is currently the National Professional Services Manager with Optometry Australia. His professional interests include keratoconus, post-graft and scleral lens fitting, as well as dry eye ortho-K and other paediatric contact lens fitting. He's worked in specialist contact lens practices both in Brisbane and in Melbourne, and has also worked in the field of contact lens manufacturing for 4 years. So one of the intended outcomes from tonight is to iron out any misunderstandings and to answer any common questions that you might have, again, like I said, whether it's in the room or online, around Medicare and appropriate use of items and billing. I'd encourage anybody in the audience to at any time raise their hand if they have a question during the discussion. Please just wait for the roving mic so the people online can hear you as part of the webcast that's being broadcasted. Obviously, the people that are online, if you can ensure that you, on the right-hand side, you've got a tab there that says Ask Question. You can click on that and the questions will come through to us, and we can in turn put them to the panel to generate discussion and to answer your questions. Just briefly, a couple of learning objectives we have that we want to come out of tonight. We want to be able to advise practitioners on the correct and appropriate use of Medicare in different items and in different clinical settings based on the presentation. We want to be able to educate practitioners on new Medicare items and a review of older Medicare items that have been in the schedule for some time. And we'll touch briefly on the upcoming Medicare review and Optometry Australia's advocacy plan moving forward. As we run through the case studies, there'll be polls, there'll be questions we'll ask the people here in the audience to raise a show of hands depending on what they feel the right answer might be. And we'll encourage those online, obviously, to poll through the online multiple choice. Your answers will not be recorded for assessment or CPD purposes, but purely to generate discussion and to be able to generate a good sort of understanding of these different case studies. A couple of housekeeping things. Please ensure that you're able to fill out and leave your evaluation form or the exit survey online before you log off tonight. And tonight's session will carry 1.5 CPD points. So before we get into the case studies, which will probably take up the bulk of the evening, I'm just going to invite Luke Arundel to come to the platform and to just have a brief overview of both some old and new items. Thanks, Luke.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Really straightforward tonight. We've talked about this. We're going to be providing some information. The reason why we're doing that is captured in the second slide, or if you're not bulk billing, then getting a better rebate for your patients. We're going to be talking about doing it in a way that keeps us out of trouble. This is our timing for tonight. Short presentation, straight into the case studies, and as Simon mentioned, throw out any questions as you go. So first of all, what's happening with Medicare? Well, we're all well aware of the changes that were introduced on January the 1st, 2015. I've highlighted in red the extension to the freeze on indexation, and down on the bottom right-hand corner is really the area that I want you to focus on. A little bit hard perhaps to really gauge what's happening in the big picture scenario day to day in practice, but this is the figure that we're looking at. So there's been about a $28 million reduction in money being paid out to optometrists for Medicare items. Now, that's the actual figure. What's happening in as far as the whole story is probably a little bit different. We can see here in these graphs, 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, we've had that steady rise in Medicare benefits being paid out. And if we actually look at perhaps where we would have been in 2015, the actual number's more around this, okay? So a $50 million cut to optometric MBS fees. So latest figures suggesting there's around 5,000 optometrists in Australia, and you can all do the maths, that's about $10,000 per optom. So, obviously we could talk about the weather. It's been an interesting week around the country, but we're here to talk about a storm that's coming, and the storm that's coming is with health spending. So we see on this graph, over that first 20 years, fairly flat increase in spending, and then we see a really large increase over that last 10 years. So there's no wonder that we're seeing a squeeze on the health dollar, and this is obviously why across the board we're seeing people look at where can they make savings. Now, optometry, we fit into that top little wedge of the pie, and we're bundled in with allied health. And you might think, great, that's going to be off the radar, but unfortunately we're not. If we look at the top 40 items on the MBS, they account for 70% of the money being paid out, and optometry has 2 items in that top 40. So, where are we now? We're actually at the period where most of the work's being done. Optometry Australia has been representing the profession at all stages throughout the MBS review. And to be fair, this is the first time it's had a comprehensive review since its inception. So it's probably overdue. And later this year, December, we're expecting that second report to government. So first of all today, if we're talking about Medicare, it's perhaps important to make sure that we do have a system and that it remains viable for optometry to remain in it. Part of the push is obviously advocacy. It is an election year, after all. And something that I feel is probably important to highlight is that we are a tiny profession. Less than 5,000 of us compared to over 110,000 doctors. And what this means at the end of the day is those organisations can afford to splash dollar amounts like $3 million on advertising during MasterChef. For us, we really need absolutely everybody on board if we're going to make our voice heard. So this is the campaign at the moment. You will all get a hard copy in the June edition of Pharma, but we also have a raft of things online that we'd ask you or invite you to consider thinking about. So first of all, the direct letter. This is advocacy in its most basic form. Write to the Health Minister. We've done the hard work for you. There's a template there ready to go. Adjust as you will, send it in. There's an online petition that we'd love people to support, whether it's on their website or just mentioning it to patients. We've got fact sheets for patients in your practice. For anyone who's looking to get more involved, we have advocacy tools. This is a heat mapping tool. It identifies eye care need mapped out as per electoral divisions. So we have the resources. If you are keen to go and talk to your local member, we'd love to hear from you, and we have some resources to support you with that. Now, back to the main lecture. Thinking about getting those extra dollars in your pocket, I'm certainly not suggesting that you work harder. What we're talking about is billing smarter, okay? So let's have a look at some of the golden oldies, some of our neglected items, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the new items. So we have a lot of data that we collect. We have a statistician that works at OA, and we know that for many optometrists they were simply billing $900 and $918, maybe $940 prior to 1st of January 2015. But with those changes, it's perhaps time to have a little bit of a think about some of the other items that are on the optometrical MBS. Now, 944, our foreign body item. 1 in 5 of us has used it, so that's fairly impressive, seeing it was only introduced late last year. Telehealth, fairly slow off the ground. And the West Coast is really the only state to have used it at that data collection point. So we'll come back and talk about those in a moment. But first of all, for removal of embedded corneal foreign body. For anyone who's not familiar with this, the basic points are the foreign body must be embedded. So no good for a contact lens that's just lodged up underneath the top lid. We're talking about something that's lodged in the cornea. The other points perhaps are that the foreign body and the rust ring must be removed. It pays at a higher rate than just using a 913 or one of the IC items. And down the bottom I've just mentioned, items like this actually took 8 years of advocacy to get through the Medicare Services Advisory Committee. So this is submissions, getting support from other professions and lodging costings into the government. So we won't dwell on that one. We'll come back to it in the case studies. We'll talk a little bit about the telehealth items. Now, something that's poorly understood is that the optometrist does not need to be present for the entire consultation. And the time period also does not have to be continuous. So you can come in and out of the telehealth consultation and that time counts towards the item that you can bill. Its purpose is fairly straightforward. It's really to try and improve access to ophthalmology for those people that are struggling to access those services at the moment. It's not for use for hospital patients, and it must be an audio-visual link. So it's no good with email and telephone. You must actually have that AV connection. It's a real consultation, so there are record-keeping obligations. You need to be thinking about recording some of these things. Where was it performed? Why was it performed? Who was in attendance? And of course your game plan moving ahead, what the treatment regime may be, what the further consultation parameters might be further on down the track. This is what it's paying out, less than 15 minutes and over 15 minutes, obviously 2 different items, and down the bottom again they must not be an admitted patient. The other item for residential aged care facility, only point to note here is that they must not be a resident of a self-contained unit. Eligibility. Well, who can use these things? So for our online viewers in Tasmania and Northern Territory, your entire states are telehealth eligible areas. Otherwise, there needs to be 15 Ks from the patient and the ophthalmologist. And to find out if you are in a suitable area, simply go online. So for our locals tonight, this is the telehealth eligible area. Basically everything outside of the red will count. But what I would like to stress is those residential aged care facility patients and the Aboriginal Medical Service patients, they are exempt. Okay, you can bill them anywhere. Moving on. For this slide, I used to work at McDonald's. I've said, would you like fries with that 20 or 30,000 times? And these next 2 items, I really think of as the supersize items. You've done the work and it's an add-on to an existing consultation item that you're going to bill. So for the first one, 943, there is nothing mysterious about it, okay? I've simply written that there because at least once a month I'll be talking to someone who's never heard of it. So we don't get the MBS in a hard copy anymore. It's available online. We'll talk about that later. And this is something that's simply slipped under the radar for many optometrists. So if we dig into it, it is additional testing to confirm diagnosis of or establish a treatment regime for a significant binocular or accommodative dysfunction. Now, they don't specify what that significant BV or accommodative dysfunction is. They're giving you some discretion. But if we're going to meet the rest of the descriptor, they do tell us what tests we need to do. They also tell us what it's not to be applied for. So we can't use this one for learning difficulties or learning disabilities. We have a defined age group who's eligible, and they let us know that it is available or that it's able to be billed once every 12 months, and that we can't bill it with the 916 or contact lens item. Next one of our supersized items is the 942 low vision assessment. So again, there is a defined group who we can use this for, and it's for testing of residual vision to provide optimum visual performance, and it might be something as simple as providing some magnification. So again, not for use with the 916 or contact lens item. This one can pay out twice a year. Next on our list, the golden oldies, so 121314. In as far as what's happening with these, well, everyone's using them more, is the short answer. Now, does that make sense? Well, yes it does. We can see up here, largely due to the fact that we can only bill the 910 every 3 years now rather than every 2 years. Initial consultations in those three items are dropping, and we're seeing an increase in 121314 from our colleagues around the country. Some points to think about in as far as staying out of trouble. For 912 and 913, the patient must have been to the practice before within the time frame specified in the descriptor. So you can't use that for a new patient to the practice. Now, 912 is a significant change of visual function. So for this item, they actually define what significant is. And these additional notes are at the front of the MBS in the explanatory notes section. So we have down on paper what they consider as a significant change. And you've got a few different options to go for. So it's not just prescription, the visual acuity must be noted. And importantly, it can be corrected or uncorrected. So they give you a few options on that one. 913, same story, can't be used for a new patient to the practice. They have to have been there before. And before we move off that, that is something that may change in the future. Again, some advocacy from Optometry Australia. We've had agreement with Medicare that this will change further on down the track if you have access to the notes. But for now, we have to follow these rules. This is the descriptor that's written into the regulations. 913, they specify that you must document the new signs and symptoms on the card. Now, 914, let's get straight out there and say it. It does not have to be at the same practice, so you can use this for a new patient. And this is for a progressive disorder. So straight away, they've ruled out presbyopia. That's probably fairly sensible. In the explanatory notes, they give you a few extra hints as to what a progressive disorder may be. And again, this list is not exhaustive. There is some clinical discretion. I'm going to come back and talk about how you might justify or validate those things for further on down the track. Now, when in doubt, consult the rulebook. This is the rulebook. Changes fairly frequently. Latest one's actually May, 1st of May. Okay. Nothing has changed though due to the freeze-on indexation. We have that on the website. The address is here. And essentially you simply need to go to the For Optometrists tab. It's that one on the right. Little drop-down box appears, and then we choose Professional Practice. If you haven't been to the website before, your member number is the password for first login. And if you've forgotten your password, you can reset it. If you're having any trouble, simply give us a call. These are the Medicare resources. And we will also be putting this entire lecture online tomorrow or the next day. Now, additional information. The MBS from the government is not overly long. It doesn't contain every possible scenario. And over many years, Optometry Australia has compiled this document, largely based on advice or rulings or other information that we've received from Medicare. So it's a fairly comprehensive document. For instance, on the 940, the visual field section, it's 4 pages long because there's a heap of extra or additional information about that item that we've housed in a central location. There's also some expanded case studies available with that. Now, we won't be talking about this tonight, but just to let you know, if anyone is thinking about moving away from bulk billing, we know we've got a lot of members sitting on the fence. We've actually seen a shift away from bulk billing, the most significant shift we've seen for a long time. We do also have resources for that area, and we may be having a webinar on that later on in the year, so watch this space. These are some of the additional resources, practice posters, things like that that you can put up in your practice at home. So back to Medicare. If you are unsure, you have other options. So they do have a phone line. I personally find it fairly unhelpful. You'll generally just get the MBS regurgitated back to you, and it's non-legally binding. If you would like helpful advice over the phone, you are more than welcome to call me, because there's an excellent chance somebody has asked that question before and we've received a ruling on it. If you would like a written ruling, you can also submit one to Medicare and take about 10 days to come back to you. So on one hand tonight, we're talking about going out there, taking that money that in many cases is justifiably yours, but we're also encouraging caution and hopefully giving you some of the tools to be applying the MBS with confidence, knowing that they are monitoring us, okay? These days, same with health funds, everybody is looking at metadata, and they're looking for patterns, they're looking for irregularities, and they're looking for any outliers. So I'll touch on that just very briefly. If you do run into trouble with Medicare, typically the first step is what they term an intervention. So this will be, you'll receive a phone call and a registered letter setting up an interview appointment where you will address concerns that Medicare has, and you're given an opportunity to explain your side of the story and perhaps why your profile is so different to your peers. If you don't successfully or perhaps fully address those concerns, the next level is that you'll be bumped up to professional services review. So quite a few options that they have at their discretion, and obviously something that everybody will be keen to avoid. It is going to be helpful to think about what are they looking for. They're looking for these things. You know, was the service clinically relevant? What was your record keeping like? On the 913 it says you must record the new signs and symptoms. If you don't have that down on your record, you're going to be hard pressed to justify why you billed that item to Medicare in an audit. And lastly, and something that is really important, you know, would it be acceptable to a body of your peers? So we know that they're looking at you. You also have the ability to check your own stats. Now, this web link currently doesn't take you anywhere because they are reviewing the 2015 data. They only have 2014 data available online at the moment, but they have told us that that is going to change in the near future. The bottom part, how to actually do it, you simply run a report. So if you have Optometry or Sunix, you'll simply type in I want a report on 915s, for instance, put in a 12-month period, and it will tell you how many 915 consultations you've performed. If you're still working on paper, you can ask Medicare to generate that report for you. What it compares to is data like this. So we can see that in 2014, the average number of 915 consultations claimed by Australian optometrists was 22. Now, what does that mean? Is it something that we need to be stressing about? Something that I'd like to get across is it's simply a guide and it's simply a tool to let you analyse your data. Now, if you're working in the Northern Territory, you might be working at an AMS centre, you may have 300 or 400 915s going through in any 12-month period, and that does not mean you're going to be audited. There are checks and balances. So remember, our provider number is registered to a geographic location. I'm sure they'll look at that and it will probably make sense to them. If you're in Melbourne CBD and you're doing 300 or 400 915s, then perhaps you might need to get ready to justify those billing decisions to Medicare because you're probably on their radar. So avoiding trouble, very straightforward. You simply need to think to yourself, was the service clinically relevant? Did you apply the descriptor correctly? So just because you've seen a cataract patient or someone, you know, with macular degeneration doesn't mean you can use a 914. You've got to meet the rest of the descriptor. So it needs to be a comprehensive reassessment, first in the course of attention, and it's got to be over 15 minutes. And lastly, could you justify that decision to a panel of your peers? So the other things, just to keep in the back of your mind before pressing that button to bill that item. So I'll hand back to Simon.
Thanks, Luke. He promised me he would whiz through those in 25 minutes, and he was true to his word. He did very well. So he effortlessly got through all the information we wanted to get out, and obviously there'll be plenty of time for questions. I'm just going to address a couple of very quick questions from the your online peers, and then we might throw one to Steve and Luke before we start with the case studies. Question from the ether. For telehealth items, can I just FaceTime an ophthalmologist, or do I need to create a separate consultation? It will depend on the ophthalmologist. So some ophthalmologists are happy to just take Skype and FaceTime calls during their consultation. Others, you'll need to give them a call. So my suggestion would be talk to the ophthalmologist that you will generally conduct a telehealth consultation with, and work out what works best for you and for them. The other question related to that was, what can the ophthalmologist claim for telehealth consultations? Or they'll charge their own Medicare item, their own consultation item for the initial consultation. One for Luke and Steve before we get on to the case studies. If a patient presents to you for a diabetic eye examination and the dilation happens on a second visit, when can I bill a 915?
Yeah.
Well, the 915 has to be billed at the time that the mid-radiatic examination is performed. It's very clear from the item descriptor, so you can't split the consultation into two and bill the item that way.
And a common question actually from today, was if I've seen a diabetic patient, I've done an initial consultation, they drove in, they didn't have their sunglasses, they weren't ready to have the DFE at that initial consultation. Quite often, I've done it myself, I'll book them back in for 2 weeks, it might be at spectacle delivery. The $6 million question there, or the $58 question, I guess, is, can I bill a 915 if I do a dilation at that visit 2 weeks down the track? And look, unfortunately, the answer is no. That consultation is second and subsequent to the initial course of action. The 915 descriptor is for an initial consultation. So if it was 6 months, 12 months down the track, perhaps, but for something that's a week or two down the track after you've done the initial consultation, Medicare is saying no, that one is a 918.
So you bill it as a 914 or 918?
Correct.
All right, so we might get on with these case studies. We've got quite a few to get through, and there's already a fair bit of discussion being generated online. So in January this year, a 17-year-old patient attends to your practice for the first time, and you conduct a comprehensive eye examination. The prescription is as written there, -2 for the right eye, -250. The patient is eligible, and you bill item 10910. February 2018, the patient returns complaining of difficulties seeing the board in class with the glasses you prescribed. You recheck his prescription and conduct an ocular health examination. You find a 2-line change in acuity and the following refraction, -3 right and left. What do you bill for this second visit in February 2018? So how do you want to conduct the people in the room? So for those online, obviously the poll should be open now for you to be able to answer that first question. We'll be able to
Just do a show of hands for each of you.
show of hands for A in the room. B. C. And any takers for D? Didn't think so. Okay, so online we have 89% saying A and 9.5% saying B and 1% saying C. We've had a couple of Bs actually. We had a couple of in the audience, as well as 10% online. The correct answer is A. Okay. So for those who thought B, Steve, do you want to perhaps address that? We were just discussing that at the beginning of the evening.
Yeah, well, this is a very good question because it's a real-world, commonplace situation, I imagine, and it can be tricky. So 912 is correct, but as you probably know, in the MBS book, there's a requirement that the change in vision has to be 2 lines or greater for a 912 to apply. So from the way the question is written, all we know is that the refractive error changed by 1 diopter, which is a lot, obviously. and the corrected acuity probably didn't change significantly. So in this question, we don't know what the change, we don't know that there's been a 2-line change of vision to justify a 912. We can assume that a 1 diopter change in refractive error will cause maybe a 2-line change in unaided vision. But unless we've recorded that on our record card, then we don't know for sure. So unless the change in vision has been recorded and it's 2 lines or greater, then technically a 912 should not be used.
They do tell us that one, though. That's been 2-line change.
Oh, sorry, it's been.
Sorry.
It wasn't in the original question. So, so there is a 2. So that's fine in this instance. The other thing I would say is that, you know, using a 913, which 10% of people chose, might be okay. Normally, a change in refractive error or a complaint of blurry vision wouldn't lead to starting a new course of attention requiring a comprehensive examination. It's a judgment call. Now, in this case, because it's a 1 diopter change, you might say, well, there could be other things going on. That's enough to justify a new course of attention, a 913 under new signs or symptoms. But had it been, say, a 1/4 diopter change in this period instead of a 1 diopter change, the patient might still come in reporting blurry vision, but it would be, I think, harder to justify starting a new course of attention under a 913. So I think you've got to look at each case individually to see whether the change in refractive error, if it isn't a 2-line change, warrants starting a new course of attention under a 913. So, for example, if a patient had a little bit of astigmatism come into the equation, which wasn't there before, you might start to think, well, incipient keratoconus, I better check everything. So a 913 would probably be reasonable in those circumstances.
The way I read it, it looks like they're eligible for both, really, not either or. But say, for instance, same circumstance, they didn't have the same change of 2 lines, but they still presented with that same complaint. Wouldn't they not be eligible for a 913? They're presented with a new complaint, you still have to examine the reason why.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It depends on the magnitude of the change. I think in this case it could, but you might find that a lot of cases don't change by that amount. They might still report blurry vision, so that's the new, what you might call a new symptom. But if the blurriness is from a 1/4 diopter change in their vision, would that justify a comprehensive examination as opposed to...
Continue examination on, it's even more reason so to keep examining. Because if it was just a matter of a simple refraction, it's a 918.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point. So you don't know until you've done your examination. You can't just make the decision based on the presenting symptom.
Any other questions from the audience? Yep.
Does the 2-line change of vision required for both eyes bilaterally or just one?
One eye is fine. Yeah. Yes.
Question from David in Victoria. He says, for a 913, can you charge if they have been at the practice 2 years ago but went to another practice in the interim?
It's the descriptor is at the same practice. Yeah. So as long as you've met those conditions for your practice, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Steve, you happy with that? Yeah. They've been there previously, gone somewhere else.
Correct. Yes.
And come back to you.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Go for it. Yeah.
The other point, is just thinking laterally as well, because another common question is, can I use 914 for myopia? If it's progressive myopia. And it's a little bit difficult because there is no line in the sand. How much is progressive myopia? Is it 1 diopter every 6 months? Is it 1 diopter every 12 months? When we're thinking about these items, in many cases, the one that you're dwelling on, there's potentially another item that you could use. So, in this scenario, they've probably had a 2-line change in vision. If it, was clinically relevant for you to do a comprehensive reassessment for that, then bill it under 912. Don't even, spend that extra time thinking about it. And the other comment that Steve had mentioned when we were talking about this one was that, the initial complaint was blurry vision and then the secondary complaint was blurry vision. So is it new signs and symptoms? Potentially, but it's certainly got some legs, the 913. But, in this case, it's potentially easier just to slot it into a 912.
Yeah. Are there a couple of hands up? Just wait for the mic so we can have those online hear you.
Sorry, the way I look at it too is you look at your billing patterns and you're less likely to use a 912 than 913. So if there's opportunity to use a 912, I'd choose the one I'm less likely to use.
Is that advice that you would generally...
Well, this is where Steve and I disagree because I've been helping people and Steve has generally been on the other side, but I see it a lot in the interventions that people have got astronomical 914 utilisation and 0 912s. I'm also guilty of that because I always forget about 912. But, if there is a situation where potentially it could be under both items and it's completely legitimate either way, and let's think about it, cataract patients, macular degeneration, those people with diabetic retinopathy, yeah, it's certainly something to think about, okay? It would smooth out those curves for you and you'd be less likely to be down the extreme range, particularly on 914, which, as you say, we're using a lot more because you can use it for first-time patient to the practice.
Just one final one that sort of branched off from the 914 and the progressive disorder that you were speaking about earlier, Luke. Can dry eye be considered a progressive disorder? Maybe we put Steve in the hot seat to begin with.
Oh, well, I suppose if it's an advanced or severe form that creates all sorts of potential complications, where you've got obvious ocular surface disease rather than dry eye irritation or symptoms, then I think you could probably justify it. Or I guess it'll depend on what peers think. Normally a progressive disorder is something that just gets worse and worse despite treatment. So with the dry eye, you'd like to think that it can be at least improved. So I think it might be difficult to justify if you were audited and a significant number of your 914s were dry eye cases rather than more conventional things. I think it would be difficult to persuade Medicare that that's what peers do, and so they would say, look, we're not sure, we'll get a group of peers to give us an opinion on that. So I think I would probably say it's safer not to do it unless you happen to have some really bad cases. And even then, it's not going to be something that'll be picked up unless you've got a large number of them. So keep in mind that if someone has used a wrong item number once or twice, a handful of times, it's not necessarily going to create, ringing bells at Medicare where these things are monitored. So it has to be a clear pattern before some sort of alarm bells go off in the system.
One final one before we move on to case study 2. I promise we won't dwell on this one too much longer. Can a near VA shift of 2 lines result in a 912? Can we bill 912 if we've had 2-line shift in near VA?
This one was.
I would say yes, as long as it wasn't presbyopia, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not listed in there because we looked at that the other day, didn't we?
Yeah, so it says,
it's not listed in the descriptor, but they've got corrected or uncorrected.
If it is presbyopia though, it doesn't exclude presbyopia. 912 doesn't exclude presbyopia. So 912 just says a 2-line shift. Doesn't the 914 says excluding presbyopia? The 912 doesn't.
Well, that's a good question. I would think.
Again, can you meet the rest of the descriptor? Is there a reason why you need to do a comprehensive reassessment? Is it going to take you more than 15 minutes? And can you justify it? So, it's a little bit of a grey area again.
I think if the ultimate cause was presbyopia and not some other disorder, then it would be difficult to justify doing a comprehensive reassessment on the patient. There would have to be some other reason for you to suspect something happening beyond presbyopia to warrant, I think, doing a comprehensive reassessment.
Let's move on to case study 2. 31st of May this year, a 57-year-old patient attends to see you whom you suspect of having glaucoma. You conduct a comprehensive eye examination and automated perimetry on the same day. Patient's IOPs were 22 and 19 respectively, and the visual field results were inconclusive. You asked the patient to return in 2 weeks to repeat the visual field test. On the 31st of May, you bill item 10910. Can you also bill item 10940? Let's open the poll for that first question. Those in the audience, who says yes? So we have most people say yes, or everyone bar one perhaps say yes. Let's have a look at the polling. 94.4% of people say yes, they would bill item 10940 at the first.
What percentage?
94.5%. So our esteemed panellists all said no. Why can't we bill item 10940 at the first visit, Luke?
We've got to have documented evidence of disease of the visual pathway.
Yeah.
So
The descriptor's clear.
in this case, we haven't met the descriptor. We don't have that documented evidence, and we're not allowed to bill that 940 at that consultation.
Correct. So if we look at the descriptor very clearly, it says that indicated by the presence of relevant ocular disease or suspected pathology of the visual pathway. So you need to have diagnosed ocular disease at this point in order to be eligible to bill 10940 at the first visit. Well, let's have a look at the second part of the question. So you may need to repeat the visual fields or wait a particular time to actually see progression. The question was from the audience, how do we determine that they have glaucoma? So what we're saying in the first instance, at the first consultation, there was no diagnosis of glaucoma made. So therefore, item 10940 does not, the descriptor does not meet what you've seen. At the second visit, you conduct a second visual field test which shows some partial field loss. You decide it would be best practice to also check the patient's pressures. Pressures are 22 and 20. So the pressures are consistently high. You've now identified a present field loss indicative of the ocular disease that's present. And so you then bill item 10940 for the visual field at the second visit. You happy with that, Steve?
Yes, generally. Look, this is a very good question as well because, as Simon has said, the item descriptor says there has to be the presence of ocular disease. Presence, it has to be there. So, based on the information we have here, we have to say there's no ocular disease present. But let's say that the rest of your examination, the fundus exam, revealed an abnormal optic disc, and you're quite confident that there is glaucomatous or some sort of pathology present. So on that basis, you can justify using the perimetry item. But unless there is some other sign, apart from an inconclusive visual field, then you shouldn't use the 940.
So before you go on, I might just bring somebody in offline. So one of the questions online is, how do you determine progression with no initial visual field? So we're not sitting up here saying don't do the fields. We're just saying you can't bill item 10940 for that fields. So you can bill privately for the visual fields, but you just can't bill Medicare until you have determined that they You have diagnosed the actual glaucoma. Sorry, Martin, you had a follow-up question. We'll need the...
Sorry, can you repeat the descriptor again, please?
So the descriptor says verbatim for item 10, 940 and 941. Has been performed by an optometrist on both eyes or one eye, where indicated by the presence of relevant ocular disease or suspected pathology of the visual pathways or brain.
So in this case, it says, you suspected of having glaucoma, so I'm guessing that there was nothing else other than a slight elevation of pressures.
Yeah.
And that was enough, a sufficient suspicion, not enough for a suspicion of glaucoma.
Yeah.
It's like people doing fields because they've got a family history.
It's exactly the
Exactly
point
the
we were
same
going to
one.
raise next. Just
Yeah.
to clarify, yep, that is
So family
not
history,
eligible.
yep, is not eligible for a 940. Yeah.
Fields in the first place.
It's just, we'll take your question in 1 second. We'll just get the mic up and running.
This is where you can obviously do perimetry, even if the item descriptor isn't justified for billing a 940. You can certainly do perimetry, but it needs to be explained to the patient that they'll have to be charged outside of the Medicare schedule for that.
Question.
So if there is optic nerve cupping changes that look very suspicious or an abnormal OCT, it isn't evidence of progressive disease, but it is evidence of abnormality of some sort. That still isn't, you're not eligible to bill a 10940?
No, we've said that you are. If there is presence
Of ocular disease.
of relevant ocular disease, if
I
you've...
don't know whether it's ocular disease as such. I mean, it's out of the
Well, if it's an
so-called
abnormal
normal
optic
range,
disc,
but yeah.
If you think it's a pathological optic disc, then that's
That's
ocular
ocular
disease.
That can be
Yeah.
either through your subjective assessment of the optic disc or objective OCT assessment,
Yes.
either or.
Yeah, and it's not a glaucoma item, so it doesn't have to be indicative of glaucoma, but relevant ocular disease. Got two questions just here.
So I just think there's one other point though too, that people can have quite a significant progression in glaucoma and still have quite normal fields. So even though the fields come up normal, it's quite a range of normal for an individual. So you might say, all right, the discs look dodgy, family history, pressures, so on and so forth, narrow angles, whatever it may be. But you've examined the patient to a degree that you're satisfied that you're suspicious to a reasonable degree enough to perform fields and been reasonable about doing it. And yet they still come out normal. That doesn't mean that... And what would you do? If they've got normal fields and you spot all that suspicion, you say, oh, no, they're fine, I'll come back in 3 years or 2 years. You'd still have your suspicions about it because they can still have glaucoma and have normal fields.
Yeah, look, that's a very important point. I mean, as we know with glaucoma, the other signs are more important in making the diagnosis, so you're quite correct. Yeah.
Really, they're good for look for progression or whatever it may be. So you can look at your indices on your fields and use that as a starting point or particular reference point for future reference.
Yeah, I mean, by the time there are visual field changes, the disease is, already left the gate.
Yes, question just in front of you, Michelle.
So if pressures are at 35, 40, let's say, but you do the fields and there's no field loss, still not covered by 940?
I'll go. I mean, I think it would be. I mean, if you've got abnormally high pressures, to me, that's ocular disease. So I would say that
opposed to the
I don't think
Yeah,
I don't think
that's
there'd
the
be any
suspicious
doubt
one.
about that.
Yeah.
Study 28 or something? I think the OAT study might answer that question. Is it the OAT study that anything over pressures alone? I think to diagnose glaucoma just based on pressures, I think what's 28 or something, just purely on its own, nothing else.
Well, yeah. Look,
I think you'd be safe.
Yeah.
We'll just say that.
Remember that the Medicare schedule doesn't have everything spelled out in black and white. The reason optometry is in the MBS is because we're professional people who can make independent judgments when things are a bit grey. So as long as you have acted reasonably, I don't think you should worry about that level of detail in how you itemise these cases.
But
You go.
940 is, it is an issue. It is something that there's a lot of additional advice. And again, there's
The item use
four
guide,
pages
yeah.
on 940 in that item use guide. Do you have to be in the practice when a 940 is billed? How much can the assistant do? How much do you have to do? What are your responsibilities? These, broader issues have been fleshed out.
From what I've heard on the grapevine, I think the main issue with it is that people are over-servicing by doing things like just based on family history or something. They're running fields, get the girls to do it, whatever. And I believe that'd be an area where
The main thing that we were hoping really to flag was, family history alone is not enough, and that was really just to try and flesh that out.
So before I give the poll results for the second question, can we have a show of hands from the audience? Who would bill a 918 once you've diagnosed glaucoma and bill the 940 for the fields at the second visit? So you've brought them back, you've done the fields, you've billed the 940, you've decided to check the pressures as well while they're there. Do you bill the 918 for the IOP check? Okay, for those online, everybody in the room is shaking their head. Those online, we had a third of the people saying yes, they would bill the 918, and 2/3 say they wouldn't bill 918. The answer, obviously, as we all know, we'll go with the 2/3 majority, is no, you cannot bill a 918 with a 940 or a 941 at the same visit. Okay, so again, an issue that commonly comes up. We have a lot of practitioners come to Luke and I at conferences and the like and just double check and triple check that, and they're not certain what they can and can't do. So we thought it would be a good idea to flag that right off the bat, that you cannot bill a 918 for a pressure check. You can bill them privately for the extra clinical testing, and you can bill for the 940 on the day. Happy with that, gents?
Yep.
All right, let's move on
And
to...
one final point before
Yep.
we move on. There's 2 a year for 940. That does not mean that's the end of the game. If you need and can clinically justify a third or fourth, you simply can move on to 918s. Okay, so it doesn't mean all or nothing.
I'll just drag this out for a couple more minutes. Someone from the ether asks, can we bill a 940 at the same day as a 910 if the patient comes in and complains of unexplained headaches?
Well, if you have, the item descriptor, as we've said, says where indicated by the presence of relevant ocular disease or suspected pathology of the visual pathway. So if you feel that the patient's symptoms, the nature of the headache, could reasonably indicate suspected pathology of the visual pathway, then the answer is yes. You can.
And those two items will go together. 916, 918, 931, 932, 933. You cannot use the 940
Yeah,
with.
so there's 5 items that you can't use with the visual field items. The domiciliary and the 916 and the 918. Question?
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm something. I was, just an example, as I was advised by an ophthalmologist, I actually asked him about the visual field test. And let's say I suspected that there was, in this guy is definitely a strong family history of glaucoma and that. And we did quite a lot of subjective testing and objective. And when it came to the visual field, there was a significant defect. And then I actually chatted to him and he said, don't do another visual field test. Let me do the visual field test because of, the billing. They can only have it twice a year. Now, are you suggesting I don't do another second, or I can do a second visual field test and send him off and he gets another visual field test at the ophthalmologist and that will be covered? Do you know what I mean? Like it's such a cut.
Are they using ophthalmology items or is there an optometrist at the ophthalmology centre? Because
good
there'll
question.
be
Is that a different billing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh.
So they won't impact
their
on
own
our schedule.
He advised me not to do a second visual field test with respect to the billing. Oh, okay.
Not too sure. Yeah, maybe
all right.
you can have one up your sleeve for later.
Okay, that's okay.
So just a very quick one. If the second test came back okay, question from the ether, if the second field came back clear, can you bill the 940? Again, the answer is no, because there's no presence of ocular disease.
Based on the perimetry, but again,
Yeah.
as we know, glaucoma is a multifaceted disease, so you just shouldn't look at one test result in isolation of everything else. So, in a sense, these questions are a little bit kind of theoretical, so that it's wise to see them in the context of how they work in the real world, how the patient presents in the real world.
Case study number 3. 6-year-old child attends your practice for the first time for his first eye test. His parents feel his poor performance at school may be attributed to his eyesight. In greater than 15 minutes, subjective refraction acuities ocular health examination reveals no abnormal findings. You suspect you are not getting the full RX with dry ret and the child may be over-accommodating. You recommend the child return for a subsequent visit to conduct a cycloplegic refraction to determine the best course of treatment. What would you bill at the first visit? Those in the audience, who would bill A? B? C? And D? Okay. Most of your colleagues would agree with you that, in fact, 92% have said A. And the answer happens to be A. Okay, so a couple of you said B. The answer can't be B, and I'll let Luke explain why. Because this is one of his pet items. Why can't we bill a 943, Luke, at the first visit?
They're fairly clear about what tests you have to perform. Okay, and cycloplegic refraction is in there. Could be ocular motility divergences, fusional reserves, and/or cycloplegic refraction. The age group is okay, but in this case, and I guess if you had done those other ones, perhaps you could. Yep. But from the data that we've got up there, we're kind of leaning towards that's going to be coming further on down the track.
I think the other point behind this is that there are no abnormal findings revealed. So you actually have to have a diagnosis of some sort of accommodative or vergence disorder in order to bill the children's item, the add-on. And that third bullet point clearly says that there was no abnormal findings. So that's where B would be incorrect. As well as what Luke said, there was no cycloplegic refraction done at the first visit as well. So the child comes back for a second visit and you do conduct a cycloplegic refraction. What would you bill for the second visit? Who says A? Who says B? C? And who says that no rebate applies for the second visit? No one. Okay, well, we have 100% of people saying A. This will be interesting. So the child's never had an eye test before, so they won't have had 10943 billed. So he fits the descriptor that it hasn't been billed in the last 12 months. And a cycloplegic refraction was conducted. Now, what most people aren't aware of is that a 943 can be billed as an add-on to the 918. So the 918 is a subsequent visit, the 943 is for the cycloplegic refraction.
Wouldn't with billing the 943, wouldn't that be determined by the outcome of the cycloplegic refraction? Actually, they had a significant binocular, even though you've done the cyclo, wouldn't you have to find something significant to qualify for using the 943, and rather just use the 918 if there was nothing significant found?
Absolutely. If there's nothing significant found, unfortunately, it's good for the child, bad for you. It's just a straight 918.
No, that's a very good point, because then all the question tells you is that the child returned, cycloplegic was done to determine the best course of treatment. So it implies that a significant disorder was there and that a treatment plan was implemented, but it doesn't actually say it. So through implication, then it's clear that 943 conditions are satisfied, and then assuming other things are done by way of a consultation, then a 918 fits in as well.
Question from the ether to Stephen Luke. Does hyperopia itself count as a significant dysfunction in accommodation and binocularity, according to Medicare's rules?
Well, it'd be interesting to know what people think here.
Hyperopia, does that count as a
significant binocular or accommodative dysfunction? What do we think?
Yeah, what do you think?
It depends on the degree and the effect on the child. Like some children can handle +4, no problems. Other kids +150, they're buggered. Yeah, I suppose it depends on the degree of it and the child, how it affects their binocular vision system. Binocular vision.
Symptomatic.
It's symptomatic, I suppose, and I suppose objective and subjective, really, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, technically, if someone had a moderate to high amount of hyperopia, you could reasonably expect some sort of binocular vision disorder. But unless there is a significant dysfunction in binocularity or accommodation, then it doesn't justify the use of the item simply because hyperopia is present. So I think it's again, you have to look at the whole picture. It's not just the fact that they've been labelled a hyperope or a high hyperope that allows the use of 943.
Any other questions from the audience? One more from the ether if there's nothing from the audience. Does a patient with significant vergence dysfunction qualify for a 10914 for annual reviews? There's a couple of questions in there, I think.
A progressive disorder. So
Progressive disorder.
Where is it going to go? What's it going to progress to?
Well, I think it'd be hard to justify that as a progressive disorder. We have a comment from the audience, a request from the audience.
I would have thought that it could progress possibly to myopia and to a lot of other accommodative disorders, so I don't see a problem at all in calling it a progressive disorder.
Yeah, look, I think that's reasonable. If you have reasonable grounds to suspect that it's going to progress into something, some worse kind of dysfunction, then yes, you could use a 914, I would say. Keep in mind that, you know, if you had a few instances of that in your Medicare statistical profile, then that wouldn't be a problem. But if you had like scores of them and you were audited, then you'd have to really make sure you've got documentary evidence for that. So you can't, I guess what I'm saying is you shouldn't just automatically jump to a 914 because there is a vergence disorder there.
Yeah, if you felt you could justify it, that's really what it comes down to. You know, again, it's in that grey zone where they haven't labelled it; they're leaving it at our discretion.
I mean, the acid test always is what I'm doing in terms of itemisation something I can justify to a group of my fellow optometrists sitting around, you know, the table with me. And if you feel the answer is yes, then just go ahead and do it.
Can we take one more from online before we move on? Someone sort of says, not really related to the current topic, but we bill 918 for each vision therapy session. Is that okay?
Second and subsequent consultation. In that case, yeah, no problems with me.
Yeah, I would assume that's quite normal. I mean, the patient is undergoing a course of treatment, which happens to be vision therapy. If it's in-office vision therapy, and each visit in that course of attention is a subsequent consultation, hence a 918.
Yep, and the only real caveat on that would be is the optometrist present, because obviously a lot of practices are outsourcing it to help. You know, if the optometrist is not present, then that's fine. Bill that privately. If it was conducted with the assistance of the optometrist, then the Medicare schedule will apply.
Excellent. No other questions. Let's move on to case study 4. 36-year-old male attends your practice for the first time. He informs you that he suspects a foreign body has entered his right eye. You take a thorough history, check vision and identify an embedded metallic foreign body in the cornea of the affected eye. What can you bill for this consultation if you remove the entire corneal foreign body? Who says A? Could it be A? Who says B? Any takers for C? Everybody's saving themselves for D. We have one person say C, and everybody else think D. Okay, interesting. We have 6% of people say C, and 93% say D, and the answer happens to be D, of course. And the only reason for that being that you cannot bill any other item with item 10944. So the corneal foreign body item can only be billed in isolation. It does pay out a little bit more than the 910, and if you do fulfil the item descriptor, you remove the entire foreign body, including the rust ring, on that one visit, then obviously item 944 would apply. It has to be embedded in the cornea, so that would then meet that item descriptor. Question, how about patients coming in for a lash removal? Can we bill 918 every time he comes in for a lash removal?
I certainly will do that. You know, it's clinically justifiable. I have got someone with terrible scarring at my previous practice every 2 weeks religiously for 3 or 4 years. We billed a 918 for lash removal, but I've documented it on the card. I'm ready to stand behind it and justify it to Medicare in an audit. But for me, again, you know, it's a second and subsequent consultation.
You say, Luke, your time's not free, yeah?
Sorry?
Your time's not free.
Absolutely.
Free, yeah.
Yeah, even if it's a squeeze, I mean, the GPs do it. Your bum might barely hit the chair and they'll bill it. Less than 15 minutes, no problems.
What if you just say, this is not for me? The foreign body is just it's penetrated, you're not within your scope. What do you bill? Part 2 of this question. 918, subsequent. 944, foreign body removal. 916, brief initial, or a 913, new sign and symptom. We've got a mixed result online. Who says A in the audience? B? C? And D? And the majority did say C. You'd be surprised, 85%. We have about 6 or 7% of people each say 918 and 913. Luke, why can't we bill a 913 for this visit?
Well, as we mentioned, they've got to have been to your practice before. Okay, so it can't be useful first time. Unfortunately, it rules it out. If they were a previous patient of yours, absolutely, I'd be billing 913. No problems justifying new signs or symptoms there. But unfortunately, that first line rules us out of 913.
Yep. And Steve, 918, why would you not bill a 918 if a patient attends for the first time with a foreign body?
Well, a 918 is a subsequent consultation in a course of attention, so this was a first time visit by that patient, so a 916 is the choice.
And what's nice to see is that no one said 944, which means that the message is getting across. If you don't remove the foreign body, then you can't bill 944.
And can I just maybe point out, you know, if those people at home that did pick 918, the 916 is not going to interfere with that initial consultation time frame. Okay, it doesn't reset the clock. You know, it's not going to affect you further on down the track if they're only a week or 2 away from being eligible for you know, the full initial consultation. So it's safe to use. Yep. They're both paying out the same, but
doesn't reset the clock.
It's just more appropriate in this case because it's first in the course of attention.
And so you remove part of the foreign body. You don't get it all out. You do your best. You feel like you've taken enough out, but then you decide to refer to have the rest of it removed. What would be the most ideal Medicare item? 913, 944, 916, and 914. Before I give the answer away, I think most of you did get it right. I'll just have a look at the quick poll online. Once again, most people said 916, which happens to be the correct item. Question from the audience is, what if you remove all the foreign body and the rust ring that you see, but they come back for a subsequent and there's a bit of rust ring left? Was it okay to bill the 944 if you've removed everything you can? I would say so.
I think it would be okay with that one. I mean, it would obviously be an uncommon scenario. It's not going to distort your statistics, so I wouldn't be concerned about something like that.
Yep.
It's a very central body. You might be a little bit cautious about digging too much, too. So
Absolutely.
sometimes you don't always take everything out there.
Yeah. Okay, and this is one for those legal-minded in the audience. So I'll just finish up with this question and we'll get to you in 1 second. For those that sort of have a little bit of background in regs and legislation, someone's asked for a 916 if you spent more than 15 minutes. You shouldn't be billing the 916 because it clearly states in the regs that it's for 15 minutes or less. The advice we've been given is that 916 would still be appropriate for that. Question?
I'm a little bit off topic, but if they've got a history of high impact activities,
Yep.
sometimes you might suggest doing dilated fundus exam and side-L tests and various other things, see if there's actually anything inside the eye as well. That could
Mhm.
take a bit of time. So I suppose depending on the history too, I think you've satisfied, no, it's just purely a foreign body on the
Yep.
anterior surfaces, nothing to warrant,
Yep.
once again, warrant and to do further things, not over-servicing by performing all these actions and
Mhm.
dilating them inside L tests. That would take a bit of time to do all those things. So I think in some circumstances you could bill a 10-9 or 10-900, whatever it is now.
910 or
911.
911?
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe so.
Would you suggest that if they remove the foreign body to still bill the 944 if they're doing a comprehensive eye exam, given that it pays out more?
Well, I would.
Yeah,
I'd
so
take,
would I.
I'd take the extra money.
Highest item, of course.
Yeah.
But you've just done more
But-
work in doing it.
Yeah.
And again, that foreign body item does not reset
No.
the clock. So,
Correct.
it's there for you further on
So-
down the
and
track
there
when
is
you're doing the
no-
normal one.
There is no restriction on how many times you can use it in a particular year or anything like that. There is a restriction on how many times you can use it per day, which is only once, but you can use it every day if somebody comes in every day with a foreign body. Question?
What if there's no rust ring?
So if there's just a foreign body, just remove the foreign body.
Your life's easier. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions before we move on to case study 5? Okay, this might see us through. Let's go through this one. This is a fairly lengthy one. 24-year-old female presents complaining that her eyes have been irritated, itchy and red for a number of months. 12 months ago, she presented for a comprehensive examination and later fit with contact lenses. Items 910 and 921 were billed at the appropriate times. Today, your examination reveals bilateral GPC under both lids, and your management is to cease contact lens wear, put her on Flarex for 2 weeks and then taper, and then to eventually, the intention will be to eventually refit with daily disposable lenses with an enhanced material. I think for most people that would be a fairly sound course of management. Question for those. First visit. What would you bill for that first visit with a patient has come in with a sign of a red eye, sore eye, itchy eye from the contact lenses? Everybody online is still a bit hesitant to answer. I'll go back a slide if I can. 24-year-old presents today complaining that her eyes have been irritated, itchy and red for a number of months. She saw you 12 months ago for a 910. Who in the audience thinks 911? 913? 915? And a 921. Okay. And I think everybody nailed it online. I don't think there's any doubt that that would be the only item that we could bill for that. What if the patient attends and the assessment and management is conducted in less than 15 minutes? What would you bill? Who says A? B? C? Okay. D? Okay. So a few of you have said A. A few of you have said C. We had 33% of people, 31% of people say C as well. The majority have said 916, which is what we thought. Why wouldn't you bill a 918? You could bill a 918, but why wouldn't you bill a 918 for that first visit, that first course of attention of a red eye 12 months after an initial?
I mean, essentially here we're starting a new course of action.
Yep.
So in as far as does it really matter on the ground, you're going to get paid the same. It's not resetting the clock. Something I certainly learned a lot talking to Steve about this first in the course of attention, starting a new course of attention. But in this case, seeing it is a new, or unrelated, perhaps to that last consultation, the 916 here is perhaps the most appropriate.
I'd agree with that. That was the reason we went with the 916. Patient comes back after you've started her on Flarex, review of the GPC, assessment of ocular health including pressures, compliance, use of therapeutic agent, you spend as long as you spend. What would you bill for the second visit? So the visit straight after she's come in with the GPC, you've put her on Flarex and ceased contact lens wear. Who says A? Who says B? Who says C? And anybody D? All right, good. And I think that second visit, I think everybody's nailed it. We got 100% saying 918. So we're sort of hitting him out of the park this afternoon, which is good. And I think that's really the only reasonable item that we would bill. So the GPC has been resolved. Everybody's happy there. Patient's happy. You're happy. You refit and change the contact lens material or basic parameters in order to avoid the allergic response. So what would you bill once you are happy and satisfied that the lenses fit and the performance of the lenses fit well? So post the aftercare and after all the contact lens fitting is done, what item would you fit? 921, 922, 930, and 929. A few hesitant people in the audience. So we had, this has been an interesting one, we had, well, it's changing as I speak. We had 21% say 921, 930 we had 63%, and that happens to be the correct answer. And we have about 10% saying 929. So this might be one where we pause and have a bit of a chat. So we've got almost 20%, a bit over 20% saying 921.
Yeah, but first of all, that's just going to get rejected, okay? Because you're within that time period, which is 36 months. So it would probably make its way back to you, or if you're using easy claims, you'd get that rejection on the spot, so you would know. But yeah, unfortunately, you can only claim that item once in the 36-month period, so it pretty much rules that out straight off the blocks.
And the other one that was that we had sort of 10% of was 929. So 929 is the medical.
Yeah, 929 is for medical or optical condition other than myopia, hyperopia, astigmatism, anisometropia, where the condition is specified on the patient's account. So, look, in my book, 929 is largely bandage lenses, stuff like that. And in this case, we've probably got a more appropriate item that we can use. It's there for a reason. And that's the 930.
Good. Okay. So once that's all done and dusted, the patient returns 2 weeks later complaining of flashes and floaters. What item do you bill at the 5th visit? Nobody online wants to answer this one. Let's see in the audience. 910. Who bills a 910 for the flashes and floaters? Reminder, you built it probably about 12 months and 2 weeks ago, or 12 months and maybe 13 months ago. You built a 910. 913, 914, and 918. Alrighty, and I think everybody agrees 913 is probably the winner there. We have 97+% say 913, so that's an easy one.
And if I can just add one point really quickly, I mean, this is simply just to flesh out, look, if something else pops up, we're told with 930, technically that's supposed to cover us for a while or subsequent consultations, but this issue sometimes pops up, post-cataract surgery as well. We're told we're not supposed to rebill Medicare items in that aftercare period. But if you have someone turn up with a red eye, if you have someone turn up with flashes and floaters, something that's an unscheduled aftercare, you're totally fine to go ahead and bill where appropriate, whether it's 913, 912. So really just trying to flesh out, just because you've done a contact lens item, it doesn't exclude you from billing a 913 if there is
services, yeah.
new signs and symptoms.
The other thing that is probably worth mentioning at visits 3 and 4, for those at the 10% that said 929, 929 is also included in the 36-month restriction. So you couldn't bill a 929 because of that 36-month restriction. The only contact lens item that doesn't have the 36-month restriction is the 930. Patient returns a couple of months later to make sure that her eyes are okay and the GPC is all healed up, and that the contact lenses that you prescribed at the 4th visit is suitable. Who bills a 918 to ensure that the GPC is cleared up and the lenses are okay? Talking visit number 6. Who says 916? Brief, short, initial 15 minutes, check the GPC, check the lenses. No takers. Who says 914? And who says no item? Who says you can't bill an item for that? We've got quite a few people. 68% answered A. So 68% of people thought that they could bill a subsequent visit to review the contact lens suitability. Steve, why can't you bill a 918?
Yeah, well, look, it's a very good question, and it's great that the audience here were right on top of that. In the explanatory notes for these items, it says the bulk item 10930, for example, includes those aftercare visits necessary to ensure the satisfactory performance of the lenses. So that's what it says in that box there. So that's the reason that no item should be billed at that stage. But look, it is a grey area. When does that period of fitting and ensuring satisfactory performance come to an end? That's a judgment call that each practitioner makes on a case-by-case basis. But in this case history, the wording that we've got tells us that we haven't yet completed the, satisfied ourselves that the lenses are suitable in performance.
So the question from online, Steve, just to add to that, is someone says, I thought you could only bill a contact lens item once when the lenses are physically delivered.
Well, that's correct for the bulk item. You can bill it when you've completed the fitting process, but the aftercare process obviously comes after that. Yeah. So the way it's written here, the patient is still having aftercare from that refitting that took place.
Yeah. So that sixth visit is still part of the contact lens fitting process.
So delivery is once you're satisfied with the fit completely, and then they're ready to order?
Yes.
Or
correct.
Yes. So that's assuming, I suppose, that the top item there where you built the 930, that you were satisfied with it.
In the descriptor, it's got delivery.
That actually makes an interesting thing, because I suppose maybe that's what the audience got confused, because if you've built the 930, you've finished with them, you're happy,
yep.
I've done my aftercare, so on and so forth. So they're coming back to ensure the suitability. And maybe they were thinking that you were reviewing...
You're done with the fit.
Done with the content, now I'm reviewing this GPC lid business, and I don't know.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Maybe that's why they're confused, is that think so? Or?
It may be very much where the audience were, and 2/3 of them thought 918, so they might have been looking at the GPC. Yeah.
Reviewing that, but
yeah.
Apparently not. Yeah.
So if it was purely just a review of the GPC, then the 918 would apply, I think. Yeah. Patient comes back for an annual contact lens review, unrelated to the contact lens fit. So they've just come back 12 months after they've ordered their lenses because they need a new supply or because they want a review of their contact lenses. Does an item apply? Is A the right answer? We had a couple there. B, contact lens review. 921 and 915. Again, we've got a mixed bag from those online. 38% say no item applies, and 61% say that a 918 applies, and we would agree with the majority. This is one of Luke's pet questions. Do you want to take this one?
Yes, look, it does come up a while, and we know optometrists tend to be conservative. That's obviously part of why we're here tonight. That descriptor talks about, establishing or getting a successful fit, determining satisfactory performance of the lenses. The reality is you're pretty much done and dusted by a year down the track. And aftercare might be, that aftercare period may go for 3 months, it may go for 6 months. But when we're, up and running again, it's unrelated to contact lens fitting. It's just a general review. At that point in time, could you justify seeing a contact lens patient 12 months down the track for a corneal health review? It's unrelated to the fitting. I think you could, and I'm happy to apply that item every 12 months. The 918 might be on every third year. Fine, I'll do the internal check, do everything else while we're at it. But that's an area where optometrists are underbilling. And same thing applies. If you've done ortho-K, you've set them up, you've got them through the first 3 months, they're up and running, that annual check, once they're, all things are going ahead well and good, is able to be billed as a 918. It's unrelated to that initial fitting. It's just ongoing review, and that is clinically justifiable to be seeing a contact lens patient on that kind of basis.
Just one from those online. So the question says, the trial contact lenses, do trials count as having delivered contact lenses, or do we have to wait for the patient to purchase a supply? And I think the correct answer is, in order to bill one of the contact lens items, definitely not at the trial lens stage. So you can't deliver trials and bill the 921 or the 922. And I think it's quite unrealistic in this day and age to expect somebody to purchase a supply of contact lenses from you in order to then be able to bill the contact lens item. I think once you have finalised the prescription, and as you've said, Martin, you've actually determined that these lenses are, you're happy with the fit and the vision, the patient's, and the performance of the lenses, that's when the item applies and you're able to bill it. Not when the patient purchases them, and not obviously when you've just put the trials in at the very beginning.
It is an area that I know Simon and the policy team have brought up with Medicare, because this document, was written in 1975. So it is really geared around old school lenses and custom lenses. So it's an area that we're going to be fleshing out further on down the track, but it's just notoriously slow working with Medicare on anything.
Yeah, so Luke understates how slow it is working with Medicare, and it is an ongoing discussion around being able to change even minor wording in the explanatory notes. That is obviously already as well linked to regs and other legislation. We've come more or less to the end of the evening. What I want to do is apologise to anyone online who weren't able to get to their questions. The iPad's exploding with questions from all different topics around Medicare, so this may not be the last time we sit together.
Do you want to just go to the email addresses?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So by all means, fire them in. Happy to take those questions, happy to take those calls. There is a lot of grey area, as we've seen tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to help you navigate through that.
Yep, more than happy to. Are there any final questions or comments from Steve or Luke?
No, not from me.
Okay. Thank you very much for your panel. Thank you for attendance, and we appreciate your attending on the evening.